Well, today I was honored to have Dr. Antonio Damasio on the podcast. If you're unfamiliar, he's currently the David Dornsdorf Chair in Neuroscience and a professor of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy at USC. He's the founder and director of the Brain and Creativity Institute, which researches human emotions, memory, communication, and decision-making, and he's regarded as one of the most influential psychologists of the modern era. Dr. Damasio has also authored several highly acclaimed books, including Descartes' Error, The Feeling of What Happens, Looking for Spinoza, Self Comes to Mind, and most recently, Feeling and Knowing. He received an MD and PhD from the University of Lisbon, Portugal. And this was another really fun one. We touched on basically where does this brain and mind and consciousness come from? And he traces it back to a pretty surprising mechanism. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Here is Dr. Antonio Damasio. All right. Well, Dr. Damasio, it's great to be with you on the Fit Mind podcast. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
I wanted to start with a question that seems kind of obvious, but then when you think about it, it's maybe not so obvious. And it's one that a lot of your research helps us understand, which is why do we have a brain to begin with?
Well, that's a very profound question, and I think I have an answer for you. We have a brain to help us manage our life. What we are fundamentally is complex living organisms. And because of that complexity, you need quite a lot of assistance to manage it properly. So when historically living organisms were very simple at the level of, say, one cell or a few cells, that complex could manage itself fairly well without special assistance. It's as complexity increased and organisms became more and more complicated and different systems appeared, that there was a need to coordinate. And literally the best word for this is coordinate. So it's a way of making sure that what one part is doing is not in conflict with another part, and so that there is some kind of harmony. In the end, we have nervous systems to create harmony among the different components of a living organism and to make it function in accordance with the fundamental quote-unquote goals of a living organism, which is to maintain its life as well as it can during the period that has been allotted for that life by the genome of that particular organism.
So if I'm understanding you right, so we have the body and the nervous system running throughout, and the brain is kind of this central command center that's helping us, that's helping coordinate the body in some sense?
So let me help clarify that. When you asked me, did you ask me about the brain or about the nervous system? I can't recall anymore how you formulated your question.
The first question was about the brain. Yeah.
The brain. Okay. So when I hear the word brain, for me, I'm thinking about nervous system, because I don't make a fundamental distinction between central and peripheral components. It's all nervous system. So the answer that I gave you was meant to answer the question of why is it that we have a nervous system to begin with? Because if you go back historically, organisms that were, lived for eons did not have nervous systems, did not have brains either. So brain is a sort of vague term that we use to refer to the central components of a nervous system, because nervous systems have a peripheral component, all the nerves that go into every nook and cranny of our living organism, and then there are these central components that include nuclei, and that include, for example, in the case of what we normally refer to as the brain, this complex of structures that is within our cranial vault. But even that is not one single thing called brain, because there are all sorts of different aspects of the cerebral cortex, the different nuclei that are in the base of the brain, nuclei that are in the brain stem, in the spinal cord. So it's words like brain are funny because they have different meanings for lay people and for scientists. But what I think is very good for your audience is to get the idea that the central issue is a nervous system. We have nervous systems to help coordinate life. Nervous systems are a historical answer to the complexity of our organisms, to the growing complexity of our organisms, and to the need to coordinate functions. And within that nervous system, you have both peripheral components, all the nerves that I was talking about, the ones that go out to our every component in the body, and the ones that come back from every component into this central nervous system, of which the brain is a sort of general term to designate that central complex.
One of the things that you mentioned is how in the beginning there was just action. There were just bodies, but no minds. And I thought, this was very counterintuitive to me, and it helped my understanding of how the mind came to be. So could you walk us through kind of the high level evolutionary steps here?
Yeah, so the sort of to make it as simple but hopefully true as possible, I would say that when you think about simple organisms like, for example, bacteria, you're thinking about simple creatures that have cells. They don't even have a nucleus in that cell. So that there is a living organism, there's a perimeter to that organism, and inside there are exchanges of energy and production of energy also that allow that organism to maintain its life. So there's metabolism, for example. And all this is being run according to certain goals that maintain the operations in such a way that the whole thing does not explode, it does not die off immediately or some such. So there is again, I'm thinking about the word harmony. There's a way of making the operation conform to a certain set of parameters that will allow it to continue for a certain amount of time, okay? And simple organisms like that actually have, and many other organisms, they have one cell or a few cells and sometimes nucleus or not. Those organisms clearly did not have anything that we could call a mind, although, interestingly, they had the possibility of action. They could move about in the world. They had the possibility of, in a way, sensing, in a very primitive level, sensing that there was something that would impinge against them, for example, and say, mechanically destroy them. And they can sort of recoil and move away from any kind of influence that would be destructive. And in a way, they have an intelligence, which we have to put in quotes, because it's not the kind of intelligence that you or I are normally. We're accustomed to deal with intelligence looking at somebody who is smart and is doing something very smart, or with the contrary of it, which is doing something stupid, which is contrary to what the person should be doing. Simple organisms don't have intelligence in the sense that it is minded, it's coming out of, say, for example, reasoning over a certain problem. But they have intelligence that is sort of built into the system. And that intelligence will allow them to do funny things, such as, for example, if an organism requires a certain kind of temperature to operate at its best, if the temperature goes up, that organism will move away, seeking a territory that has a temperature that is commensurate with its own internal goals. So there is intelligence in that sense, which really consists of responding to the environment in a way that will allow it to continue. So to go back to your very interesting question, you wanted me to walk you through this. Well, so there are actions in the sense that organisms can go in one direction or another, seeking, for example, nourishment, or seeking the best kind of temperature, or avoiding some kind of confrontation, quotes, with the environment or with others. And then there's this basic intelligence that is allowing them to operate better within that environment. But none of this is minded, quote unquote. And by minded, I mean none of this is accompanied by a representation of what is actually happening in the world around or inside the organism. And this is what, for your viewers, is the important thing. And when we think about a mind and we think about intelligence that is minded, we think about this possibility of representing internally what is going on inside of us or what is going on around the world. So, for example, right now I'm looking at you and I am representing you. So in my mind, there is a picture, actually not a picture, a movie, because you're moving as well. There is this representation of you physically. And when you talk, I hear the sounds that make up your sentence, and that too is represented at that level in sound form. And if you were playing music, I would listen to that. And at the same time, in my mind, I have not only you on the screen right now, I have your words when you speak. And I also have me, because I'm here too. So, and the representation of me is actually probably the most intriguing and the one that people have a harder time picturing, because it's a representation in terms of feeling. I'm not preoccupied with representing my heart or my lungs or my guts right now, but I am constantly, inevitably representing the feel that I have of my body being alive. Curiously, we pay very little attention to it, which is too bad. So that's why it's so important for us, for example, to meditate, because it allows us to get a richer picture of our representations. The scope enlarges. Most of the time, people go through life representing the outside world and reactive thoughts to the outside world without ever even noticing that they are there and that they are the support. Their living bodies, are the support for all this system of representations. And that's why the notion of mind and the notion of minded is so important, and making a principled distinction between what is minded and what is not is so critical. So when you see, or when you don't see, because you actually have to have a microscope to see, when you see creatures that are terribly small, they are, as I said, they have their little intelligence, which is not so little, but nonetheless, they have their intelligence, they have their metabolism, they're ruled by homeostasis, this set of goals and parameters that allows it to be living, but there is no mind inside that. Something that is also very interesting for you and for your viewers and listeners is that size is not necessarily the most essential thing here, because of course the size of bacteria or Damasio or what have you is very, very small, and you need a microscope to see them. But when you see, for example, a fly, a very small little organism, but guess what? A very complex organism that actually has a nervous system, and I would bet, although that's would be debatable, that those organisms have a mind. So I think there's something like the mind of a fly, and their mental aspects that allow it to govern its life, in distinction from, say, the bacteria in paramecia. So I've taken you on a rather long spiel about the fact that there's life is the essential thing. And then if life gets too complicated, it cannot be managed without the help of this coordinating system, which is the nervous system. And the nervous systems, when they get really to the top of the heap in terms of complexity, guess what? They have nuclei and cortices and so forth, and they create what you call the brain, which is how we started this interesting conversation.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. And one of the things that strikes me as you're talking about this is just the different levels that have been built off of what was mere feeling tone to begin with. I mean, so you talked about
Correct.
this very basic approach avoidance software. And then on top of that, we've layered, a visual, let's say, or other representations of the world. And then on top of those, even we might build other representations. For example, I'm seeing your face as color and form, but then on top of that, there's also projections about, based on our interactions together, kind of a sense of you as a person. So it seems like there's different layers being constructed.
Absolutely. It's extremely complex. It's extremely rich. It's extremely complex. And I think we need to pay our dues to that complexity and to recognize its complex, and it should not be dismissed in a cavalier way, because it's really a monument of complexity, and that's, of course, in the case of humans, we are, I would suspect, at the peak of that, at that complexity.
Yeah, and there's a lot of your research and writing talks about feelings, and I should just premise this, that we're not talking about emotions here. We should probably really define what you mean by feelings, but the importance of feelings and how we're not talking, or we're not paying attention enough to the importance that these give to our representation, our conscious experience. So could you explain where do feelings come from? What are they, and why are they so important?
Very good. Right. First of all, thank you for making that very clear distinction to your listeners between emotion and feeling, or at least saying that they're not the same. Because unfortunately, most of the time, emotion is what gets the attention, and people confuse emotion and feeling. And let's start with that fundamental distinction, so that people don't make confusions. When you think about an emotion, for example, fear or anger, you think about a collection of actions that are directed to the outside and certainly visible or audible to others. So you're really talking about actions. Those actions tend to have patterns. There's certain patterns to the way our faces and bodies operate when we are in fear, or when we are angry, or when we are loving. So the important thing is that it's about actions. I like to call emotions concerts of actions. They have a certain score along which they are represented, but they are visible, detectable to the outside world. And if you're having an emotion, you have a lot of trouble hiding that emotion from others, because it's there in your body, it's there in your face, and it's going out in the world in the form of action. When you have feelings, nobody can see or hear your feelings. Your feelings are internal. So the fundamental difference is that emotion, as the term implies, is about movement. It's about movement projected to the outside, whereas feelings are internal, they're subjective. Feelings are my own and your own, and I can tell you about my feelings, but you cannot see my feelings, you cannot hear my feelings, you cannot detect them unless I tell you. So it's a big difference between subjective material that is private versus external theatrical material, which is in the outside world, which is really what emotions are about. Now, the interesting thing is that what is the function of feelings? Why do we have this stuff called feeling? Well, my claim, and this is, by the way, has been my argument for a while, and I make this argument, I think, very clearly in my last book, which is called, appropriately, Feeling and Knowing, How to Make Minds Conscious. And in this book, I explain that probably the first role of feelings and the first kind of feelings that we had were feelings about our own body. Guess what? Hunger, thirst, pain, discomfort, well-being, fatigue, desire. All of these are feelings, and they are really the fundamental collection of feelings that is the base of our feeling system. What feelings, those feelings are doing is informing your mind about the state of your body. And this is really quite spectacular because it is feelings producing knowing. That's why I came to this title, Feeling and Knowing. And feelings are, for me, the inauguration of this great spectacular development called consciousness. So if you turn to me and ask me, Antonio, how did feelings start? I'll say the same way that consciousness started. Feelings are the beginning of consciousness. Consciousness started when we started having feelings that told us that we were hungry or thirsty or that we were in pain, because they were, from the point of view of evolution, a first arrival at a point of giving you information, giving you knowledge about the state of your body. And that, of course, is absolutely critical. And in the history of organisms, that is all geared to creating efficiencies about how life operates. You can see the beauty of this. If when you are in a certain state, you are, for example, running into low on your energy, it's very wonderful to have this thing called hunger that can tell you that you need to go out and eat, or you're getting dry and you need to go out and drink. So I think these two things were combined, consciousness and feeling, one giving rise to the other. And then, of course, if you are conscious of your own needs in your own living body, you're entirely open to many other kinds of consciousness, which have to do with what you see or what you hear. Because as nervous systems developed and became more complex, we were able to hear or to see or to touch. And lo and behold, when we did that, depending on which state we were in, which could be a state of well-being or a state of hunger or a state of desire, everything that was around us could be connected and be appreciated together with that fundamental feeling state. So that's why feeling is so fundamental. It is your base. You start with feeling when you have organisms that are complex enough to require a nervous system, and that nervous system needs to run the controls of this organism. Otherwise, you're just going to die. And that's why it's there. And so feelings and consciousness are sort of assistants to the process of life regulation within an organism. And they depend on this great development within a living organism, which is a nervous system. So you have really an enchainment of developments. You have life, and as life becomes more complicated, you need to have more and more devices that help you run that complexity and not fall apart and die. And nervous systems were a great answer to that. And what nervous systems produced that is fundamental to that goal of maintaining life, maintaining it in check, is actually feelings. That's the grounding of the process of maintaining life in complex organisms. And of course, once you developed feeling, you were, without noticing it, developing consciousness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of intuitive sense to me. And as you just said, and as the title of your book suggests, in order to, if a feeling is going to have any value, there needs to be a knower there, some kind of consciousness that's interpreting the signal that's coming in.
Exactly. And that knower is, of course, implanted in your body. It's really, it's so interesting because it makes sense. Feeling and consciousness makes sense because you need to regulate an organism that has become too complicated to just run on its own plain devices. And that, of course, also generates a knower, because the knower is the organism. The knower is the living organism. I'm always a little bit perplexed when people find this. I don't know what they want to know more, because they say, well, how do you know it's the knower? Well, our knowledge, our knowing is predicated on the fact that there is an organism that knows. It's revealed at the same time. You have a feeling of thirst, and that thirst is connected to a certain organism that is thirsty, and a certain organism whose metabolism requires molecules of water at that particular point. And it's all that single organism. And that organism, of course, happens to be the knower. The feeler and the knower are one and the same. I don't find this terribly complicated, provided you start from the right point. Now, of course, if you start from the top down, you may start to think that consciousness is related to vision or to hearing, which, by the way, many remarkable people before me have thought, but I think that that's just wrong, and you're not going to go anywhere with your search for consciousness from the outside world. No, consciousness is about the inside world. It's about who we are as living creatures.
I'm hearing a lot of this through the context of meditation. And one of the reasons your work really excited me is that there's a big emphasis on feeling, or the Pali word is Vedana, feeling tone, this positive or negative feeling that then gives rise to craving and clinging and eventually a lot of our mental suffering. And really the advice is, if you can notice more carefully just the pure feeling itself, just the feeling tone, then you can observe that with equanimity, and there won't be the reaction piled on top of it, because a lot of our feelings are basically maladapted in the sense that we'll layer a lot of mental suffering on top of them rather than just responding to a pure biological stimulus the way that it would have once been adaptive. So I'll just throw that out there, and also just wonder your thoughts on that, or if there's other kind of conclusions that you can build off of this emphasis on feeling.
Yeah, well, I think that also, I mean, well, obviously we share a strong interest in feeling, so we're mutually preaching to the converted. But it's really quite remarkable, because when in typical circumstances, I remember growing up and seeing people around me that were quite oblivious to their feelings. There's no question that they had them. But most of the life was directed to the outside world. What counted was the events that were occurring in the outside world, and they were running the mental events of those persons. And of course, this is perfectly true today. You look around, and many people are completely oblivious to the fact that they're feeling, that they have, on occasion they will acknowledge pain, for example, or they acknowledge their feelings in a very roundabout way, which appears couched as a crisis of some kind or a problem of some kind. And yet all of that has developed from, as you pointed out, from those mismanagements that have occurred in daily life when you are distracted, when you don't listen to what is actually happening in your organism. Another thing that comes to mind is that not paying attention to your own feelings and not allowing them to give you, proper information is a good recipe to not pay attention to the feelings of others. How can you pay much attention to the feelings of others if you don't recognize and pay attention to your own? And that, I think, makes for impoverished relations with others. Obviously, there have to be limits, but you don't want to spend your entire life just concerned with your feelings. That would be a rather maladaptive solution to problems. But you want to pay attention to them enough that you can recognize them in others, because then you have a much better chance of not making mistakes when you're dealing with others. I mean, even from a self-serving point of view, if you understand your feelings and you understand the feelings of the other, you're more likely to get what you want in life than if you don't. And of course, you can take the even better view, which is, if I understand the feelings of others, I can help them, and I can help those people that are coping with, say, negative feelings, and make life better for them, which is, of course, the preferable option. But so, from every conceivable perspective, I find knowledge about feeling extremely important, extremely relevant, and I would say that culturally, that's one of the things that societies such as ours need to pay attention to, because the world outside is so colorful and so noisy and so rich that you can easily spend an entire life just connected with the outside world without ever paying attention to what's inside. And of course, if you're doing that, you can be lucky and things go well, or you can have a disastrous life with all sorts of pains, natural and induced. But most of all, you're going to miss the opportunity of having some kind of integrated experience of what it is to be alive in the circumstances we humans have, which is the circumstances of having a very complicated organism, but one that is endowed with a nervous system that, together with the living organism, allows you to feel and allows you to have this tremendous amount of knowledge about others and about the world around.
Yeah, this is a really good point you make about how our introspective abilities are limited in a lot of ways, and especially in such a distracted world, we're liable to not pay attention to our feelings and then miss the signal altogether. So you could just keep repeating the same mistakes that are bringing up bad feelings and not even be aware that, you're feeling that way to begin with. And I'm curious, so you've explained, kind of from the cellular level all the way up to then the organism, human level, and now the social level. And then you talk about feelings are also important on a mass cultural level. Could you talk a bit more about how feelings impact our culture?
Yeah, right. The first thing I would say is the way in which, without feeling, you really cannot have cultural interactions, because they get reduced to the factual material. But the many avenues to try to answer your question. For example, in terms of a general cultural system, you have the way in which feelings play a role in the development of art. Clearly, art has been a response by feeling persons, a response to the state they're in. Whether we're talking about music or painting or sculpture or poetry, literature in general, the motive behind those developments, as far as I can understand, generally comes out of some feeling. And the feeling can be a very positive one, can be a feeling of elation, admiration for nature or another person, or it can be suffering. Quite commonly, it's actually suffering. And so a very strong motivation of artistic developments comes from suffering. You might say, well, say comedy in theater, actually not from suffering, it's from joy, but I actually doubt that. I think that even comedy, even farce, very often comes out of pain that is expressed or finds its way in generating something that could counter that pain. But then there's more. Feelings also play a role in how you organize society, in how you organize society politically, in how you organize society in terms of justice. So you have the idea of justice, for example, in relation to something wrong or not. Do we want to say correct the fact that somebody was hurt inappropriately or robbed? Even that comes out of the feeling system, because it's feelings that will give you the sense of outrage or the sense of injustice that is associated with certain events in our cultures. So not just the arts, but the entire justice system is also being very importantly influenced by our feeling systems. And of course, if you move sideways to politics, well, politics is about whether or not people think that they are getting their due, people think that they are getting what they need from their peers. And that too is filtered by a sense of being comfortable or not, of being in pain or not, of admiring someone else as a leader or not. So it's difficult to see actually where in our cultural life feelings would not play a role. It's not that they play a role here and there, it's that they play a role everywhere. They are in the background of all of that. And once again, to go to what we discussed earlier, so often people just ignore this because, again, if you open a newspaper, what jumps at you is the facts, or what people think are the facts. So it's what happened, the facts of the prices, the facts about the economy, and so forth. And we are totally dominated by that huge amount of material, that huge amount of data they have to do with the facts. And yet, the only reason why we're even discussing those facts and details is because of the role that they play in our feelings. Otherwise, we wouldn't give a damn. Why bother? So all of those things are sort of a great constructions that mask the reality of life and its needs, and which are fundamentally expressed by feeling. So it's all about either the life of the individual or the life of the group or the life of the community. And you cannot, the bridge between life and the rest of the world is through feeling. And of course, through consciousness automatically. I hope this makes sense to you.
it makes a lot of sense. And I guess, it makes me think about evolution of our species too, and where we're headed in technology. And I know you've done a bit of work around
Yeah.
machine learning. So I'm curious how we can apply these theories to making machines more intelligent or, uh, building basically conscious machines.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an excellent question. The point there is that the when we look, for example, at the world of robotics around us, it's a very interesting world. People created with their intelligence, they created these machines that are capable of operating quite efficiently and do a job. But it's quite obvious that when you look around them, that they are not intelligence in of themselves. The intelligence they have is sort of in quotes and is related to a particular job that they were supposed to do, and that their inventors ask them to do. But they are rigid. They are not adaptable to the things that are coming their way. They're supposed to do their job, and that's what robots do. And we should be thankful that there are such devices. Now, one thing that occurred to us, and this is actually work that I did together with one of my that first student and then postdoc and colleague in faculty, and his name is Kingston Mann. The idea, what we thought is this: wouldn't it be interesting if instead of having a rigid machine that is intelligent but rigid, if you would introduce paradoxically a little bit of vulnerability, if you would make that creature vulnerable by using not rigid materials but soft robotics, for example. And might that vulnerability within a more complex system actually give it the possibility of developing some intelligent way on its own to cope with the problem? So that in a very simple way is the issue. It's introducing vulnerability in something that is rigid and invulnerable, in the hope that that vulnerability would lead to, provided you have a way of computing things, would lead to a smarter way, an innovative way of dealing with the problem. And of course, the inspiration for this is the fact that we have been vulnerable all along, and our great intelligence, the intelligence of humans and the intelligence of even other creatures before us, is an intelligence that was always based on vulnerability, because what we have been trying to do is always stave off disease and death. We've been trying to do everything possible. Why is it that we have medicine? Medicine developed once we gathered knowledge about what to do with medications, surgeries, and so forth, with the role of covering up for the enormous weaknesses of our bodies for as long as that's possible. So it was this idea. And of course, this is something that, of course, for many people in the world of artificial intelligence is just a complete exotic thing. I mean, why would you do that? If the machine is perfect already, why bother to make the machine weak? And of course, but at the same time, the people in the world of machine intelligence that think that this is actually a good idea. So, it's something to be debated, and we'll see what happens in the future.
It's fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense because our intelligence, it seems like, came from this, as you're describing it, this struggle for survival. Really, this
Exactly.
desire to maintain homeostasis in a world that's constantly changing.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so I think it makes logical sense. We'll see what happens. Very good. So
I just have a couple of rapid fire questions for you that we do at the end of every interview. And the first is, what's your most surprising finding to you personally from your research?
Oh my God. most surprising finding. Well, I think that there's one general surprising finding, is that I never thought when I started my research that the effects of feeling would be as powerful as they are. I started, precisely from the point of view that I now criticize in others. I was very cognitive, and I was very interested in the visual system, for example. I was very interested in language. Those were the beginnings of my scientific career, and I was quite surprised by how powerful feelings were. I would say that's the main surprise, but it's a very old surprise. Yeah.
And is there any
Next
research?
question.
And is there any research in particular that you're most excited about for the future?
Yes. One of the things that first of all, I think that we have a chance of understanding consciousness from a biological point of view, and stopping, this idea that you cannot understand consciousness, that it is a mystery that is unsolvable. I think that's something that I would like to see disappear, and I think that we have a convincing way of arguing and saying that consciousness is in fact resolved through feeling, in terms of what it is fundamentally and what it is for, which are two different things. I think that's probably the thing that most intrigues me, is that possibility, and I would like to see that explained and discussed and hopefully accepted, so that people are don't make a mystery where it isn't, where there's no mystery anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly one of the biggest questions of science, this hard problem of consciousness. And it's exciting that your research is really getting at the heart of that. My last question for you that I asked everyone is that you have a 15-second commercial that goes out to the world with a message for everyone. What would you like everyone to know? What would you say to everyone that might help them?
Oh, can I make it an amusing answer? The amusing answer. Here's the commercial. I have a new book. It's called Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious. So go out and get it, read it, and see if you get my points. And if you don't, write me and protest. No, I think that's my very. If it were another time, but right now my book is actually coming out on Tuesday, so you have the perfect timing for a commercial for this book, and I hope you enjoy it as much as my friends say that they enjoy it and that they have learned from. So go out
Wonderful.
and get and knowing. Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was going to say that. So by the time this podcast comes out, it will definitely already be out on Amazon. And yeah, where else can folks find your work or follow you?
The work is published in books and in scientific papers, and there are things out there, older work in the lectures all the time that are on different media. So if you go to websites that have those lectures, you have a way of learning from them, and I think they are many of them are in the public domain.
Wonderful. Well, listen, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Your passion for this field is really palpable and contagious, and it really is. A lot of it's counterintuitive, but it changes the way that I've seen the world. And I thank you for your time. It's been a real honor.
Thank you, Liam. It's a great pleasure, and I'm glad we were able to talk.